Hi, this is Miss Litton, and this is my 7th period review for Honors Bio, Chapter 33, Population Growth and Regulation. Say hi.
Hi.
All right, so we're getting ready for our quiz tomorrow. The first thing I would know for sure, is the definition of ecology. Right? So now you don't need to retype. I know a lot of you have started a Google Doc, which is an awesome idea, right? And you're sharing it with people so you can work collaboratively on your review. Don't make your group too big, otherwise people don't help, okay? But you don't have to write everything down. Just, say definition of ecology, and then you can always refer it to your group shared notes for that, right? And we want to know, we learned the difference between a habitat and a niche. And if I was going to do that in the shorthand, I would just say a habitat is where an organism lives, and a niche is what it does. Perfect. Can multiple organisms share the same niche? No. If I asked you, tell me a hypothesis that says that can't happen, what would you call it? Do you remember when we talked about that? No two organisms can occupy the same niche for long amounts of time. Do you remember what that was called? A competitive exclusion principle. Okay? Can multiple organisms share the same habitat? You're all in this room, right? Are there multiple organisms in this habitat? Yeah, there's a lot of ants, which we don't appreciate. Okay, but there's us, right? There's bacteria in here. There's lots of different organisms in this habitat. So you can share a habitat, but you can't share a niche. Perfect. All right. Then we talked about the organization of it all. So we started organism. That refers to just one organism. When you have a group of the same organism, what do we call that? Starts with a P. Population. Okay, if we have several different populations together, we have a community. If we take into consideration the environment, we're looking at the ecosystem. The study of those ecosystems is called what? Ecology. There you go. When we have regions that have the same flora and fauna, the same kind of plant and animal, same climate, those are biomes. And then you have the biosphere is where all life exists. Just ping pong back and forth. You're sitting next to someone. Here's population. Explain it in your own words if you can, but here's help if you need it. Go back and forth with whoever you're sitting next to. Go. And I'll just kind of run through them. Go. Talk. It's good for you. Okay. Now, when we wanted to study populations, we're wondering, like, how fast are they growing? We have to look at the what? Birth rate minus the death rate. Okay, so we look how many births are there compared to how many deaths are there over the total what? Population. Over the total population size. When we refer to that, we are talking about biotic potential. Okay, your maximum amount of increase. How fast you reproduce. Who has a greater biotic potential, this monkey or a pig? A pig. Why? They have what? They have more offspring. Do you remember there were 4 things we needed to consider when we look at the biotic potential? See if you can right now in your group shared notes come up with those 4 different things we need to consider when we look at biotic potential. Only peek up if you need some help. So it's when do you start? How many do you have? How often do you do this? And what are the chances your offspring are going to survive? So that's the groundwork. So we know what a population is. We know about biotic potential. You're looking to your maximum rate of increase. We know what kinds of things impact our biotic potential. And when you look at organisms, they fall into one of two basic categories. And we looked at those two types of growth curves, an exponential growth curve and a logistic growth curve. And my question to you would be, how are those two curves similar to each other? How are they similar to each other, the exponential and the logistic growth curve? Do you remember? Yes.
They both have a period of exponential growth.
They both have a period of exponential growth. They both have lag, and then they go into exponential growth. What changes with the logistic growth curve, what starts to slow it down? What kind of things slow it down? Yes?
Environmental resistance?
Yeah, some sort of environmental resistance, some sort of limiting factor slows down its growth. And then it levels off at a what? Carrying capacity. Good, a carrying capacity. So that's the first thing we want to know and differentiate between the two growth curves. In the exponential growth curve, this is eat and drink because tomorrow we will die. These animals tend to be very small. They tend to mature very fast. They tend to have a lot of offspring. Do they give a lot of care? No. Okay? So they're just going for they're going for what? Quantity or quality? Quantity. They're going for quantity. They're just trying to produce as many as they possibly can. Okay? And for them to continue, they have to have unlimited resources. Are they going to have unlimited resources? No. What's going to happen eventually? They're going to what? Crash. They're going to run out of something. Where when we look at the logistic growth curve, they start to slow down because they're what against each other? What are they doing with each other? Starts with a C. They're competing against each other. And they're running out of food, or they're running out of shelter, or they're running out of mates. And so it's slowing their growth down. And they will then hover, sometimes a little above, sometimes a little below, self-corrective. They will hover at their carrying capacity. Okay? And whoever you're sitting next to, whoever has the lightest colored shirt, they may be a good friend, they may be a new friend. Tell them in your own words, I yow, what is the carrying capacity? If you're going to define that, if that came up on a quiz, go ahead. Okay, so now let's just think about what we've talked about in this chapter so far. Okay, so we have talked about the word ecology. What would you say ecology is about? What? Interactions between what? Organisms and their what? Organisms and back and forth with their environment. Good. What do we call a group of the same organism? What are they called? Populations. What if we have multiple organisms? What do we call them? A community. Good. When we talk about how populations are regulated, we talked about them. Do you need me right now?
No, finish up.
Okay. If we talk about how populations are regulated, we had two kinds of growth curves. What are the two kinds of growth curves we have? Exponential. Good. What was the other one? Logistic. Which one has the carrying capacity? Logistic, right? What's the letter for carrying capacity? K. Okay, good. All right. Ask your person next to you. Everything okay so far? Sunshine or Shadowlands? Ask them. Okay, so those questions you need to ask me. Okay, so one thing about populations are their growth curves. Another thing about population is another kind of curve. Do you remember what that other kind of curve was? Starts with an S. survivorship curve, okay? So another way we can talk about them are survivorship curves. And when we draw survivorship curves, there were how many? 3. What kind are you and I? What type number are we? 1, okay? So 1 looks something like this. What does that mean when it looks something like that? And this always started at 1,000, right? I can show you a pretty picture of it. I just want to see if you can remember. So if it started at 1,000, most of us will live out our life and we'll die when we are old, right? What would be the opposite of type 1? What would be the opposite of that? Type 3. What happens, in fact, I'm not going to say, the person with the, whose turn is it, dark or light? Dark shirted one, tell them, describe what a type 3 survivorship curve is, and what kind of animal would you expect to be on that curve, or organism? What kind of organism would you expect to be on that curve? Who's in ASB? Anybody in ASB in here? Nobody? Wow. Okay, so I would say, because of the day it's so long?
So 3 would be best. I don't have to, you just give me 1 day.
Right, 1 day, that beginning of it.
Okay, good.
Wait, well, make sure it's not a day that we have announcements as well. We have announcements on Tuesdays and Thursday, so it'd have to be a day that's either Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, right? Because announcements are Tuesday, Thursday.
So you don't want it on the day that are announcements, so you do want it on the day.
No, because we don't want to do announcements and a video.
All right.
So do it on a.
So the 2 days that we've got 2 Mondays.
Do the middle type curve too, right now while I'm
We've got
talking.
2 Monday holidays coming up.
Right.
Both of those weeks, the 2, 4, 6. So I do it on Wednesday. So the
Wednesday, 1 through 5.
Wednesday, 1 through 5.
Yep, perfect. Okay, come back to me, come back to me. So we have type 1, do you need me?
No, not right, not immediately.
Okay, so we have type 1, what was the opposite of that? Type 3, and most of those die when they are what? Young. And then here, what's the middle one? Type 2. Who would be somebody who's a type 3 survivorship curve? Tell me, out loud, say. Fish, insects, plants, right, that make a lot of seeds. Something like this, right? Here's type 3, here's type 2. All right, now, let's keep going. We talked about survivorship. Oh, then we talked about the human population. What do we know about the human population? It's starting to grow what? What? Larger, what do we call that? What kind of growth curve do we see with the human population? I'm looking for a word, starts with an E. Are you saying it? Exponential. Exponential growth curve. Okay? Now, remember we watched a video because we were like, oh my gosh, right? We talked about more developed countries and less developed countries. Who has a higher rate of increase? More developed or less developed? Less developed. So they're having more offspring. So do we need to be worried that they're going to take over the world? No. Okay? They're in transition. What will help them transition to a more stable age structure diagram? Giving them what? Medicine, food, and education. Exactly. So we want to remember when we talk about the human population, we want to talk about age structure diagrams. So if I was going back, wherever I wrote something, here, okay, when we talked about populations, we talked about growth curves, we talked about, what are those called? Survivorship curves. Then we talked about humans, and we said humans lived in 2 different ones. What were the 2 different ones? LDCs, and what was the other one? MDCs. And when you look at the age structure diagrams for LDCs, it's more like this, right? And remember that we had pre-reproductive, then we have reproductive, and then we have what? Post-reproductive. And you have a lot in the pre-reproductive range that are going to be moving into the reproductive, which makes even more offspring, right? And then when we look at MDCs, they have the more stable age structure diagram. Okay, that's what I'm referring to when we look at this right here. You all right with that? Okay, and then let's add one more layer on because you understand this. We talked about patterns. There's the opportunistic pattern and the equilibrium pattern. And remember we talked about cockroaches, and they're all about the R. Their maximum rate of increase. They are eat and drink because tomorrow we may what? Die. And we said these tend to be small, where when we look at the equilibrium pattern, it's just another way of studying the way they behave, okay, in their environment. We look that these are usually larger animals and they care for their young. So when we go back to what we studied here, right, when we look at the growth curves, who would I add on to the growth curves for exponential? I would call, what would be another thing I could say, the R species or the opportunistic, right? That would be another way to describe them, opportunistic, where the logistic one, it's more about equilibrium. And I know that's really messy, but that would be the equilibrium model. All right, and then this takes us to the next layer, okay, where we talk about how we regulate, and we talked about both abiotic and biotic factors and how they can regulate populations. Biotic just means these are factors that are what? Living, yeah. And abiotic are non-living. Like the pH or the temperature or the wind or the light. And then look right here. We know about these relationships, don't we? What is it for mutualism? What would be the mass symbol for that? Plus, plus. What about parasitism? Plus, minus. What am I missing? Commensalism. What would that be? Plus 0. We know about predation, don't we? Because we know about those predator-prey cycles that we have, right? Who did we look at for that one? The lynx and the hare, right? And we talked about what are some ways to avoid having organisms eat you. Do you remember? You could what? Hide, right? You could camouflage yourself. You could look like a leaf. You could look like something scary, right, in order to camouflage yourself. And we talked about mimicry. Do you remember the 2 types of mimicry? Think them in your head first. Think them in your head. Whoever has the darkest shirt, tell the pantalones and fuego one, the liar one. And light-shirted one, tell them the other one. Go ahead. What's the one where you're tasty, but you try to look like you're a fly, but you try to look like a spider? What's that one? Batesian. I remember that because you try to get them to take the bait. Okay? But if you're a bee and a wasp and a hornet, you're all what color? Black and yellow, black and yellow. And you both have stingers. What do you call that? What kind of mimicry is that? You remember? Mullerian. Mullerian mimicry. Okay, so I was just jumping to that part. What would this be? Abiotic or biotic? Abiotic. Good. Okay. What would this be? Biotic. They're competing with each other, right? And then this is when we talked about density independent and density dependent factors. This is density dependent. If there's more gorillas, you're going to have more what with each other? Competition with each other. That's a density dependent factor. Things like disease is a density dependent factor. As the density, as your population numbers increase, you're going to get more disease. What could these factors be doing? They could help you stay at your what? Help you stay at your carrying capacity. Because when your numbers get too high, you could get sick, and that'll bring your numbers back down so you're under your carrying capacity. So it all kind of links together. Those are all just different descriptors. competition increases when you have higher numbers. And we know that here, when it's density independent, it doesn't matter about your numbers. If you have a tornado, you have a tornado. It doesn't matter if it's going through a city that's large or you're going through a city that's small. The tornado is not a factor of the density. It's a weather condition. It's abiotic. You can't do anything to control that. It's just going to happen. The flood happens or the drought happens. It's not a factor of your population size, yet it can influence you. Let's apply that to the lynx and the hare. If there's a drought, that would be a density what? Independent factor. But if there's a drought, what's going to happen to the number of hares? They're going to go down. If the number of hares go down, what else is going to go down? The lynx. Okay? Now, the lynx is going down because there's fewer hares to eat, right? So they can't all stay alive. That would be then translating into a density dependent factor. Okay? So a non-living thing is a density independent factor. Living things tend to be density dependent factors. We talked about competition between two species. We talked about habitat and niche. You already told me about this. Competitive exclusion principle. Remember I talked about if you had a dog and the dog wants to sleep where you're sleeping on your bed. You both can't sleep on your bed. You both can't, for instance, put your head on the pillow and take up that same space. So what could you do? You could kill your dog, right? And that would be what's going on here. Those two, I don't recommend. Ms. Chevalier is like, what? I threw up in my mouth a little bit. Okay, I saw her, she goes, don't say that. So the dog, but by doing that, now you have all the space on your bed, right? So that works out for one. It doesn't work out so well for the other. But what would be another thing you could do? You could just kind of split up the area of your bed. We call that what partitioning? Resource partitioning. So we can see that here, where somebody takes the top of the rocks and somebody takes the bottom of the rocks. So you're partitioning it out, you're separating it. And then this can lead eventually to whole new species. Because you could have your dog become specialized for the bottom of the bed and you could become specialized for the top of the bed. Okay? And over time, then you only sleep at the top and they only sleep at the bottom. Doesn't really work with dogs, but you know what I mean. Okay, lynx and hare we already talked about. We talked about camouflage and hiding. We already discussed that. Batesian and Mullerian mimicry. Here's a fly trying to look like a bee. So he's trying to think, hey, I got a stinger, but he's a liar. Pantalones en fuego, take the bait. That's a Batesian mimic. But here is something that has a stinger, and he looks like other things that have stingers. That would be stinger, stinger, and that would be Mullerian mimicry. Talked about the 3 types of relationships. Do you feel okay about that? And you could give an example of each one. There's a parasite. There's commensalism. This is mutualism. And then the very last thing we talked about is how a community can change over time, and that's called succession. And we determined that overall, it's not bad to have some disruption. Disruption can be good. But what we determined is we don't want to have too frequent of disruption, but we also don't want to have too low. We want to have intermediate disturbance of an intermediate size. And that will overall be healthiest for our ecosystem. If, for instance, all I do is cut down or burn all of these plants away, but the soil is still there, and the plants grow back, what kind of succession is that? Secondary. Why? Because secondary succession, I have soil. Okay? If, however, a volcano erupts, because I'm in Hawaii, and lava spews, I'm having trouble with my lava, and lava spews all over here, and then it hardens like rock, then what kind of succession, that was really hard to get out, what kind of succession would that be for it to take over there? Primary succession. Okay? Now, let's talk about what kind of resources you have available for you to get ready for your quiz tomorrow. Just making sure it's still recording. What could you use as ways to review? Tell me. Yes. The quizzes is. Where is the quizzes is posted? In Google Classroom. What else could you use to review? Yes.
The videos you post.
This video right here. And if you had trouble with the chapter because you missed a whole chapter, you could go watch that whole chapter if you wanted to watch it. Or you could just watch this review video. What else could you do? Quizzes is, the videos that are posted. Yes.
Group shared notes.
Your group shared notes. And your notes you took right now, right? Is that what you're going to say?
I was going to say the extra questions, the recommended questions.
Good girl. Additional objectives. Remember those? Those are the ones I did not lecture on, but they're on the calendar, and you know I'm going to have them on your quiz. What else could you use to get ready for your quiz tomorrow? There's other sources of questions besides quizzes. Where else could we be that? We don't know another way to say it. That's how we say it. Yes?
Maybe the ed puzzles?
Oh, the ed puzzles would be another good way to review. What else? Yes?
The textbook?
The textbook has questions at the end of each chapter, right? And it has summaries. Those are all things you could do. Okay? Input studying is just reading group shared notes, reading summaries. Output studying is actually practicing answering questions. I highly recommend you practice answering questions. And if you imported, remember all the questions I asked in class? Some of you put those into your group shared notes, so try to see if you can answer those as well. Is there anything I haven't covered that you would like me to go over with you? Okay, do a great job. I'm already proud of you, and I will see you mañana. If you're tired, go make a piece of toast and know that I love you.